Sable had not woken up this morning expecting armed soldiers at her door, but here they were. 6 of them, maybe 7. She had stopped counting when the first one dropped to his knee. Full armor. The royal crest of the Ashenmore throne stamped across every breastplate in polished silver. Swords at their hips, cloaks muddied from what must have been days of hard riding, and every single one of them was kneeling in the dirt outside this tiny, unremarkable cottage in the middle of nowhere, their heads bowed so low she could see the backs of their necks. They were not kneeling to her. Sable turned slowly and looked at the man standing behind her in the doorway. Her husband, the man she had married yesterday morning out of pure, reckless, white-hot spite. He was holding a cup of tea. His hair was uncombed. He was wearing a loose linen shirt with a button missing at the collar, and his feet were bare against the stone floor. He did not look surprised. That was the part that made her stomach drop. The soldiers, the kneeling, the royal crest, none of it had put so much as a flicker of shock on his face. He just stood there, quiet and still, the steam curling up from his cup like this was any other morning. "Your Majesty," the lead guard said, his voice rough with emotion. "We have been searching for 3 years." Sable's breath left her body. "Your Majesty." She looked at Thane. Thane, who chopped his own firewood. Thane, who had a vegetable garden with crooked rows and a fence he had clearly built himself. Thane, who had said maybe 40 words to her total since the moment they met and had married her in a roadside temple with wildflowers in a jar on the altar because the temple had nothing else to offer. "You should come inside," Thane said to the guards. His voice was calm, low and unhurried, the same quiet tone he used for everything, like he was inviting them in for breakfast rather than acknowledging that he was apparently the missing king of the entire realm. Sable opened her mouth. No sound came out. The lead guard rose to his feet, and she saw his face properly for the first time. He was older, weathered, with deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes that looked like they had not rested in a very long time. When he looked at Thane, there was something raw in his expression. Relief so profound it bordered on grief. "Sire, the kingdom," the guard began. "Inside," Thane repeated gently. The guard swallowed hard, nodded once, and gestured to his men. They rose in unison, armor clanking, and began filing through the cottage door. Each one glanced at Sable as they passed. She saw curiosity, confusion, and something sharper when their eyes dropped to her neck and found it bare. No bonding mark, no mating bite. Just the unmarked skin of a woman who was legally bound to their king, but bore none of the signs that the bond was real. She had married a stranger to punish her family. The marriage was nothing more than ink on a temple registry and a set of vows spoken before a priestess who could barely hear them. And now that stranger was a king, and every soldier walking past her could see exactly how hollow the arrangement truly was. "Thane," Sable said, her voice coming out strangled. He paused in the doorway, half turned toward her. For just a moment something flickered in his dark eyes. Something tired and almost apologetic. "I should have told you," he said. Then he walked inside and left her standing in the morning light, alone on the cold ground, with absolutely no idea what her life had just become. It had started, as most catastrophically stupid decisions do, with a dress fitting. 3 days earlier, Sable Hargrove had been standing on a wooden platform in her mother's parlor while a seamstress jabbed pins into the bodice of a gown she had never asked for. The fabric was a shade of ivory so pale it seemed to glow, which only made Sable's skin look sallow by comparison. Her mother had chosen it deliberately, she was sure. "Stand up straight," Lady Hargrove commanded from the settee, not looking up from the correspondence in her lap. "You are slouching again." Sable straightened. The pins bit into her ribs. "The Keld family will be arriving the day after tomorrow," her mother continued. "Lord Darwin expects a bride who carries herself with some measure of grace. I trust you can manage that for a single evening." Sable said nothing. She had learned years ago that silence was safer than argument in this house. Her older sister Ianthe swept through the door in a cloud of rose perfume, took one look at the dress, and winced in a way she probably thought was subtle. "Oh, that color?" she murmured sympathetically. "Perhaps if we added some blush to her cheeks." "We have tried blush," Lady Hargrove said. "We have tried everything." Sable stared at a point on the far wall and let the words wash over her like cold water. She was used to this. 22 years of being the wrong daughter in every conceivable way had given her a thick skin. Or at least, the appearance of one. Ianthe was the one they were proud of. Ianthe, with her gleaming copper hair and her powerful wolf, and her advantageous marriage to a northern alpha who controlled half the timber trade. Sable was the spare, the afterthought, the daughter whose wolf had surfaced late and weak, who preferred books to ballrooms, who had the unfortunate habit of saying exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment. And now she was being sold. That was the word for it, even if her parents would never use it. Lord Darvinkeld needed a wife from a respectable bloodline. The Hargroves needed his family's military alliance. Sable was the price. She had met Darvin once, 6 months ago, at a regional summit. He had looked at her the way a man looks at a horse he is considering purchasing. Checked her teeth, metaphorically speaking. He had broad hands and a cruel mouth, and a laugh that sounded like something breaking. "You will make the best of this," her father had told her when the arrangement was finalized. Lord Aldrich Hargrove, a man who treated his daughters like diplomatic currency and saw nothing wrong with it. "Every woman in this family serves a purpose, Sable. It is time you served yours." So Sable stood on the platform and let them pin her into a dress she hated for a man she feared, and she said nothing. Until the second night. The Keld family arrived in a procession of black carriages and armed riders. Darvin dismounted in the courtyard, and Sable watched from her window as he surveyed the estate with proprietary satisfaction, like he already owned it. Like he already owned her. That night there was a formal dinner. Sable sat beside him and smiled when required and ate nothing. Under the table, Darvin placed his hand on her knee without asking. When she flinched, he squeezed harder. "You will learn," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "Not to pull away from me." Something inside Sable broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, the way a branch gives under too much snow, with a soft internal snap that no one else hears. And through the break, something hot and reckless poured in. She excused herself after dessert, climbed the stairs to her room, and packed a single bag. She took her plainest clothes, the small purse of coin she had saved from years of selling dried herbs at the village market, and a bread roll she stole from the kitchen on her way out. She left through the servants' entrance while the household slept. She walked through the night, following the river road south, away from the estate, away from the Keld carriages, away from everything she had ever known. By dawn, she had reached the outer villages, the scattered settlements at the edge of Hargrove territory, where the roads turned to dirt and the trees grew dense and wild. She did not have a plan. She had the opposite of a plan. She had a burning, all-consuming need to do the one thing that would make her untouchable, the one thing her family could never undo. She needed to marry someone else first. The temple in Brindlewood was barely more than a stone hut with a wooden door and a bell that had not been rung in years. The priestess was ancient, half-deaf, and visibly confused by the wild-eyed young woman standing on her threshold at sunrise, demanding to be married immediately. "To whom?" the priestess asked. Sable realized she had not thought that far ahead. She was still standing in the temple doorway, heart pounding, when she saw him. A man walking up the road from the opposite direction, carrying a bundle of firewood on one shoulder. Tall, dark-haired, quiet-faced. He moved with the kind of deliberate calm that suggested he was in no hurry to be anywhere. He was an alpha. She could smell it, even from a distance, but his scent was muted, contained, like a banked fire rather than an open blaze. "You," Sable said, stepping into the road. He stopped, looked at her, said nothing. "Are you mated?" she asked. A pause. "No." "Are you married?" Another pause. "No." "Would you like to be?" He stared at her for a long moment. Then he set down the firewood. The ceremony, if it could be called that, took less than 10 minutes. The priestess bound their wrists with a strip of cloth, spoke words that Sable barely heard over the roaring in her own ears, and recorded their names in a leather-bound registry that smelled of mildew and old ink. Sable signed her full name in a hand that barely shook. Thane signed only his first name, in handwriting so precise it looked like calligraphy. She did not notice that at the time. Afterward, he picked up his firewood and walked her to his home. The cottage sat at the end of a dirt path, backed by forest on 3 sides, with a small garden and a woodpile, and a view of absolutely nothing. It was clean inside, sparse and warm. 1 room with a hearth, a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a shelf of books that she would later realize were written in 4 different languages. She did not notice that at the time either. "Are you hungry?" Thane asked. These were the first words he had spoken to her that were not answers to direct questions. "Starving," Sable admitted. He made her bread and soup. The bread was fresh, still warm, clearly baked that morning. The soup was simple but good, seasoned with herbs from the garden she had seen outside. He moved around the small kitchen with quiet efficiency, never rushing, never fumbling. He set the bowl in front of her and sat across the table and watched her eat, with an expression she could not read. "You do not have to tell me why," he said after a while. Sable looked up, a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. "Why what?" "Why you needed a husband before noon." She put the bread down. "It is a long and unflattering story." "Most honest stories are," he said. She told him some of it. Not all. She told him about Darwin and the hand on her knee and the dress that was the wrong color. She did not tell him about the years of being not enough, because that felt like too much to hand a stranger across a table. Thane listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once, as though what she had described was exactly as terrible as it sounded and did not require commentary. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. "I will sleep by the fire." That night, she lay in a stranger's bed in a stranger's house and listened to the forest sounds outside the window. She could hear him breathing across the room, slow and steady, and she thought about how strange it was that his presence did not frighten her. Darwin's proximity had made her skin crawl within minutes, but Thane, this man she did not know at all, radiated a kind of stillness that made the air around him feel safe. She fell asleep faster than she had in months. And then, the morning came, and the soldiers with it. Now Sable stood in the corner of the tiny cottage and watched 7 royal guards try to fit themselves around a table built for 2 while her husband, the missing king of Ashenmoor, poured tea with the calm of a man who had absolutely nothing to explain. "Your Majesty, the regent is failing," the lead guard was saying. His name was Fenwick, the captain of the king's personal guard, and the desperation in his voice made the small room feel even smaller. "Lord Castor has held the throne in your absence, but the border wars have worsened. The Eastern Pacts are threatening full secession. The treasury is nearly bankrupt. Sire, the realm needs its king." Thane set down the teapot carefully. "Castor is a good man." "Castor is a steward," Fenwick said, his voice tight. "He was never meant to rule. He has held it together for 3 years through sheer stubbornness. But he is breaking, sire. The council is fracturing. The people are losing faith." Sable watched Thane's face. It remained impassive. Still, the way deep water is still, revealing nothing of what moves beneath. "And you found me how?" Thane asked. Fenwick hesitated. "A registry entry in the Brindlewood Temple, sire. A routine border survey uncovered it this morning. Your signature was recognized by one of our scribes." The calligraphy, Sable thought suddenly. That impossibly precise handwriting in a dusty village registry. He had signed his name the way a man signs who was trained from birth to put his name on documents that shaped nations. She felt dizzy. The woman, Fenwick said carefully, his gaze shifting to Sable. The registry lists her as your wife. Every guard in the room turned to look at her. Sable's mouth went dry. She stood there in yesterday's wrinkled dress, her hair tangled, her feet bare on the cold floor, and felt the full weight of what she had done settle onto her shoulders like a stone. She had married the king, not a quiet nobody, not a convenient stranger. The king, the Alpha King of Ashenmoor, the man whose disappearance had thrown an entire realm into chaos, the man whose name was spoken in the same breath as legends, and she had proposed to him on a dirt road because she was angry at her mother. I need air, Sable managed. She pushed past the guards, through the door, and into the cold morning. The frost-covered grass bit at her feet and she gasped, but she kept walking until she reached the garden fence, where she gripped the rough wood with both hands and tried very hard not to be sick. Behind her, she heard the cottage door open and close. Footsteps approached. Slow, unhurried, familiar already, despite everything. Sable, Thane said. You are the king, she said, without turning around. A pause. I was. You are the king, she repeated, her voice climbing. And you let me marry you in a roadside temple with a jar of wildflowers and a priestess who could barely hear the vows. You asked, he said simply. Sable spun around and stared at him. He stood a few feet away, his hands at his sides, his expression open in a way she had not seen before. Not guarded, not hidden, almost vulnerable. Why? She demanded. Why would you say yes to a stranger? Thane was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the garden, bending the herb stalks and carrying with it his scent, warm and deep and grounding in a way that made her chest ache for reasons she could not name. Because you look like someone who needed a door to walk through, he said. And I had one. Sable's eyes burned. She blinked hard and looked away toward the tree line where the forest pressed in dark and dense. What happens now? She whispered. Thane followed her gaze to the trees. Something shifted in his expression. Something old and full of a grief she did not yet understand. That, he said quietly, depends on whether I go back. Thane went back. He did not announce it with ceremony or make a grand declaration. He simply walked inside the cottage, spoke to Fenwick in a low voice Sable could not hear, and then returned to the garden where she was still gripping the fence like it owed her an explanation. I need to return to the capital, he said. You do not have to come. Sable stared at him. The morning sun caught the angles of his face, and she realized, with a jolt, that she had never really looked at him properly. Not as a stranger she had grabbed off a road, not as a convenient solution, but as a man, with a jaw that could have been cut from granite, and eyes so dark they swallowed light and shoulders that carried something far heavier than firewood. If I do not come, she said carefully, what happens to the marriage? It stands regardless. You would be free to live as you choose. And if I come? Something moved behind his eyes. Then we continue the arrangement. Publicly, you are the queen consort. Privately, you owe me nothing. Queen consort. The words hit her with the force of cold water poured down her back. She, Sable Hargrove, the wrong daughter, the spare, the one who could not even stand straight at a dress fitting, was technically the queen of the realm. Her mother was going to have a stroke. That thought, petty and satisfying and entirely inappropriate, was what made her decision. I will come, she said. The journey to the capital took 2 days by horse. Fenwick's men formed a tight escort around them, and Sable rode beside Thane in silence that should have been uncomfortable, but was not. He did not try to fill it. He did not ask questions or make conversation or explain himself further. He simply rode beside her, steady and quiet, and occasionally pointed out a hawk circling overhead or a stream that was running unusually high for the season. It was the pointing that undid her, just slightly, because it meant he was paying attention to what she might find interesting, and that was such a small, careful thing to do that it made her throat tighten. The capital was everything the cottage was not. Ashenmore Keep rose from a granite ridge overlooking the river, its towers sharp against the sky, its walls blackened by centuries of weather and war. The gates opened before they reached them. Word had traveled ahead. The courtyard was full of people, nobles, guards, servants, advisors, all of them staring, all of them whispering, all of them looking at Thane as though he had risen from the grave, and at Sable as though she was something unfortunate stuck to his boot. A tall man with silver-streaked hair and a face carved from exhaustion descended the keep steps and stopped in front of Thane. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached out and gripped Thane's shoulder with a hand that trembled. "You stubborn, impossible man," he said, his voice cracking. "Castor?" Thane said. And there was warmth there. Real warmth. The first she had heard from him. "I am sorry." "You should be." The regent, Castor, pulled Thane into a fierce embrace that lasted exactly 2 seconds before he stepped back, composed himself, and turned to Sable with an expression of polite bewilderment. "And this is?" "My wife," Thane said. The courtyard went very quiet. Sable lifted her chin and tried to look like a person who belonged here, rather than a person who had been sleeping in a stranger's cottage 2 days ago and wearing the same wrinkled dress for the better part of a week. She was given chambers, connected to the king's private rooms by a heavy oak door that locked from both sides. The rooms were enormous. The bed could have fit 6 people comfortably. The wardrobe was empty except for a single nightgown someone had found for her. Plain white cotton, clearly borrowed from the servants' quarters. That small detail stung more than she expected. She washed, changed, and stood in the center of the vast room feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. At dinner, she was seated beside Thane at the high table. The hall was full. Every noble family in the capital had come to see the returned king and his mysterious bride, and Sable could feel their eyes on her like insects crawling across her skin. She ate carefully, conscious of every movement, every gesture. Beside her, Thane ate almost nothing. He responded to questions from his advisors in the same low, measured voice, but she noticed his gaze sweep the hall repeatedly, cataloging exits, counting faces. His shoulders never relaxed. "You are not eating," she murmured, low enough that only he could hear. He glanced at her. Something flickered. Surprise, maybe, that she had noticed. "Neither are you," he said. "The soup is terrible." The corner of his mouth twitched. Just barely? Just enough. That night, alone in her massive borrowed room, Sable lay in the dark and listened to the silence on the other side of the oak door. She pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and tried to ignore how cold the sheets were, how empty the room felt, how ridiculous it was that she had felt safer in a one-room cottage with a stranger than in a palace full of people. She was almost asleep when she heard it, a sound from beyond the door, low, guttural, and wrong. Not human exactly, not animal exactly. Something caught between the two, strained and trembling, like a body fighting against itself. Then silence. Sable lay perfectly still, her heart hammering, and stared at the locked door until dawn. She did not ask him about the sound. She wanted to. Every time she saw him over the following days, the question sat on her tongue like a stone. But Thane moved through the palace with the guarded precision of a man walking through a place he recognized but no longer belonged to, and the distance he kept from everyone, including her, made it clear that questions were not welcome. So instead, Sable watched. She watched the way he held himself in council meetings, where she was permitted to sit because, technically, she was the queen, spine rigid, hands flat on the table. every muscle controlled with a discipline that went beyond habit into something that looked almost painful. He never raised his voice. He never gestured broadly. He kept his body contained, compact, as though he did not trust himself to take up space. She watched the way people reacted to him. The advisors flinched when he stood too quickly. The servants gave him a wide berth in the corridors. Even Fenwick, who clearly loved him, maintained a careful distance when they spoke. Everyone orbited Thane at a radius that suggested reverence and fear in equal measure, and she watched the way he watched her. He thought she did not notice. But Sable had spent a lifetime being invisible in her own family, and invisible people learned to see everything. She caught him glancing at her during meals, looking away the moment she turned. She caught him pausing outside her door in the mornings, lingering for a breath longer than necessary before his footsteps continued down the corridor. On the fourth day, a wardrobe appeared in her room. Not the empty one that had been there before, but a new one, filled with gowns in deep greens and soft blues and rich burgundies, colors that would look good on her. Colors that were nothing like the washed-out ivory her mother always chose. Sable ran her hand along the fabric and felt her chest do something complicated. She found Thane in the library that evening. He was sitting in a window seat, reading by the last of the daylight, and he looked up when she entered with an expression that suggested he had not expected company and was not entirely sure what to do with it. "The dresses," she said. "What about them?" he asked, with the careful blankness of a man who absolutely knew what about them. "You chose the colors." He looked back down at his book. "Castor arranged the wardrobe. Castor does not know what colors suit me. You do, apparently." His ears went faintly red. Sable bit back a smile and sat down in the chair across from him. "What are you reading?" she asked. He turned the book so she could see the cover. It was a treatise on herbalism. Specifically, a treatise on the medicinal properties of high-altitude plants found in the Northern Territories. "You are reading about herbs," she said. It seemed relevant. Relevant to what? He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than usual. "You mentioned at the cottage that you sold dried herbs at a village market. I thought you might like the library's collection on the subject." He had remembered. A throwaway detail from a conversation she barely recalled having, and he had remembered it and gone looking for books she might enjoy. Sable opened her mouth to say something light and deflecting, and what came out instead was, "No one has ever done that before." Thane looked up from the book. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the vast, careful distance he maintained between himself and the rest of the world seemed to shrink. "Done what?" he asked. Paid attention. The silence that followed was warm. Not tense, not awkward. Warm, the way the air inside the cottage had been, scented with bread and wood smoke and safety. "Tell me about the herbs," he said. So she did. She told him about the summers she had spent in the estate gardens as a child, learning the names of plants from the head gardener because no one else had time for her. She told him about the first tincture she had ever made, a disaster that turned the gardener's hands orange for a week. She told him about the village market and the little stall she had run in secret because her mother would have been mortified to know a Hargrove was selling things like a common merchant. Thane listened to everything. He asked questions that proved he was not just listening but understanding. And when she described the orange hands, he laughed. It was a quiet sound, barely more than an exhale, but it changed his entire face. The rigid control softened. The hard line of his mouth curved into something real, and his eyes creased at the corners, and Sable felt the breath leave her body because for one unguarded moment, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It took 10 days to fade," she added, flustered, talking too fast now. "He had to wear gloves to church." Thane laughed again, slightly louder this time, and Sable felt something bloom in her chest. Fragile and terrifying and undeniable. After that, the library became theirs. Every evening, after the council meetings and the audiences and the endless parade of problems that came with a kingdom on the brink of collapse, they met in the window seat. He read while she explored the shelves. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence while the fire burned low. He began leaving books on her chair, ones he thought she would like, with no note or explanation. She began bringing tea, brewed with herbs she found in the kitchen garden, and leaving a cup on his side table without comment. Neither of them mentioned these things. They simply appeared, like the dresses and the colors and the way his footsteps always paused outside her door. One evening, she fell asleep in the chair. She woke to find a blanket draped over her that had not been there before, the fire freshly stoked, and Thane gone. The book he had been reading was still open on the window seat, face down to hold his place, and beside it, a single sprig of dried lavender. Sable held the lavender to her nose, breathed in, and felt the defenses around her heart give way a little further. That night, the sound came again. Louder this time, closer. A ragged, tearing growl from behind the oak door that made the wood shiver in its frame. Then a crash, something heavy hitting the floor, and a silence so sudden and complete, it felt as though the air had been sucked out of the world. Sable was on her feet before she knew she had moved. Her hand was on the door handle. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. She turned the lock. The king's chambers were destroyed. That was the first thing Sable registered. The desk was overturned, papers scattered across the stone floor like fallen leaves. A chair had been splintered into pieces. Claw marks, deep and savage, ran across the wall beside the bed in long gouges that had torn through the plaster to the stone beneath. And in the center of it all, on his knees, was Thane. His shirt was torn. His hands were pressed flat against the floor, fingers splayed wide, and she could see the tremor running through his arms. His head was down. His breathing was ragged and shallow, each exhale coming out as a low, vibrating growl that she felt in her teeth. He was shifting, or trying not to. She could see it in the way his shoulders rolled and strained, the way the muscles in his back rippled beneath his skin as though something was moving underneath, trying to get out. His nails had lengthened into claws. The veins in his forearms stood out like cords, black against his skin in a way that was not normal, not natural. "Thane," Sable whispered. His head snapped up. His eyes were wrong. Not the dark, steady eyes she knew. These were gold, blazing, wild, the eyes of the wolf burning through the man's face, and the expression in them was not rage. It was terror. He was afraid of himself. "Get out," he snarled, and his voice was layered, doubled, the man and the beast speaking at the same time. "Sable, get out now." She should have run. Everything in her screamed to run. The door was right behind her. Fenwick was probably somewhere in the corridor. She could scream for help and be gone before anything happened, but she looked at his hands on the floor, trembling, clawed, fighting for control. She looked at the claw marks on the wall, and the splintered chair and the chaos of a man at war with something inside himself. And she saw, with terrible clarity, that no one was coming. No one ever came. He did this alone, every time, behind locked doors, and no one ever came because everyone was too afraid. Sable knelt down on the floor. "What are you doing?" Thane gasped. The gold in his eyes flared brighter. She could hear something cracking, bones shifting, and his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might shatter. "I am staying," she said. "You do not understand." Each word was dragged out through gritted teeth. "If I shift, I will not know you. I will not know anyone. It takes everything from me. Please, Sable." The please was what undid her, not a command, not a roar. A plea from a man who was used to handling his worst moments alone and had long since stopped expecting anyone to be brave enough to stay. Sable reached out and placed her hand on his. The contact was like touching a live wire. Heat surged up her arm and into her chest, and for a disorienting, breathless second, She was somewhere else. She stood in a throne room. Not the one she had seen in Ashenmore Keep. This one was darker, older. Its pillars cracked, its banners burned. The fallen lay across the stone. The air was thick with the aftermath of battle, suffocating and final. And in the center of it, a wolf. Massive, black-furred, standing over the body of a man in battle armor, its muzzle stained dark, its chest heaving. The wolf's eyes were gold and empty, and it did not recognize what it had done. Around it, the survivors pressed against the walls, their faces white with horror. Not horror at the fallen, horror at the wolf, at their king. The vision fractured. Sable gasped and wrenched back to the present. Her hand was still on Thane's. The trembling in his body had stilled. The claws were retracting slowly, the black veins fading. His eyes were shifting back from gold to dark, like embers cooling. He was staring at her with an expression of unguarded shock. "How did you do that?" he whispered. Sable's pulse roared in her ears. "I do not know." It stopped. He looked down at his hands, turned them over, flexed his fingers. Human fingers. No claws, no tremors. The wolf. It stopped. He sat back on his heels and pressed his palms against his eyes. His breathing was still unsteady, but the raw animal edge was gone. What remained was just a man, exhausted and shaken and desperately trying to hold himself together. "This is why you left," Sable said. It was not a question. Thane did not answer for a long time. When he finally lowered his hands, his face was open in a way she had never witnessed before. Every wall gone, every mask removed. "I hurt someone," he said, "during the coup. My wolf surfaced and I lost control, and I hurt someone I was supposed to protect. Someone who did not survive." After that, the episode started. Every time the wolf tries to surface, I lose myself. There is no thought, no recognition, just the beast. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. 3 years I have been fighting this. 3 years of locking doors and sleeping alone and never letting anyone close enough to be in danger. Sable felt tears burning behind her eyes. And tonight? Tonight was the worst one yet. Coming back here, to this place, to the throne room where it happened. He shook his head. "I should never have returned." "But it stopped," Sable said, leaning forward. "When I touched you, it stopped." "Yes." He said it like a confession, like an admission of something he was ashamed to need. "I do not know why." "Does it matter why?" His jaw tightened. "It matters because next time it might not stop. It matters because the wolf is getting stronger, and my control is getting weaker. And if you are standing next to me when it finally breaks through entirely, you will be the first person it reaches." The words hung between them, cold and final. "That is not going to happen," Sable said firmly. Thane looked at her, and the expression on his face was so worn down, so depleted by years of carrying this alone, that it made her chest physically hurt. "You do not know that," he said. "Then let me stay and find out." He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the vulnerability was tucked away, folded back behind the careful, measured control she had come to recognize as his armor. "No," he said quietly. "The door between our rooms stays locked, from your side, every night." "Thane, this is not a negotiation." He stood, putting distance between them, and picked up one of the scattered papers from the floor. His hands were steady now, but she could see the effort it cost him. "Go back to your room, Sable, please." She stood slowly. Her legs felt unsteady. At the door, she turned back. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his silhouette rigid against the glass. "I am not afraid of you," she said. He did not turn around, but she heard his breath catch, and when he spoke, his voice was so low she almost did not hear it. "You should be." Sable closed the door between them. She did not lock it. The library was empty the next evening. Sable waited for an hour, sitting in the window seat with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands, watching the fire burn down to embers. He did not come. The book he had been reading was still on the sill, face down, holding a page he would never finish. She picked it up and held it in her lap for a long time before setting it gently back where it belonged. The following morning, the oak door between their chambers was locked. From his side, she pressed her palm flat against the wood and stood there, feeling the cold grain beneath her fingers and the silence on the other side. It was the silence that hurt most. Not anger, not argument, just absence. The particular cruelty of someone choosing to become a wall. Then she dressed and went to find Castor. The regent was in his study, surrounded by dispatches and looking 10 years older than he had a week ago. He glanced up when she entered, and his expression shifted into something careful and diplomatic that she had learned meant bad news was coming. "He has asked that you be moved," Castor said. No preamble, no softening. "To the east wing. Away from his chambers." The words landed with a force that stole her breath. "He has also requested that your interactions be limited to formal court functions only. No private meetings, no library visits, no contact beyond what protocol requires." Sable gripped the back of the chair in front of her. "Did he say why?" Castor studied her for a moment. "He said it was for your safety." "He is lying." "Perhaps," Castor said quietly. "But he is also the king, and I cannot overrule him on matters concerning his own household." He paused, then added, more gently than she expected. "For what it is worth, I do not think he wants this either." By afternoon, her things had been moved. The new chambers were grand and impersonal and felt like a beautifully furnished prison. The wardrobe full of dresses he had chosen for her was there, carried over by servants who would not meet her eyes. She opened it and stared at the deep greens and soft blues, and felt the care behind each choice pressing against her chest until she had to close the doors and turn away. Sable sat on the edge of the new bed and tried to understand why this hurt so much. She had known this man for barely 2 weeks. She had married him for the wrong reasons. She had no claim on him beyond a legal document signed in a crumbling temple. And yet, the absence of him felt like a wound that would not close. The days that followed were slow and suffocating. She saw him at meals, seated at the far end of the high table now, and he never once looked in her direction. She saw him crossing the courtyard with Fenwick, his stride purposeful, his posture rigid, and when she raised her hand once in a tentative wave, he turned and walked the other way. It was her mother's house all over again. Being in the same space as someone who refused to see her. Being made invisible by a person she desperately wanted to be visible to. Her wolf, the quiet, half-formed thing that had barely stirred her entire life, began to howl. Not outwardly, inwardly. A low, constant keening that lived beneath her ribs and would not stop. She could not eat. Sleep came in thin, restless scraps that left her more exhausted than before. Her hands developed a fine tremor that she hid by keeping them in her pockets or pressing them flat against the garden soil. On the 5th day, Fenwick found her in the garden. He stood beside her for a moment, watching her pull weeds from a bed she had planted with kitchen herbs because she needed something to do with her hands or she would lose her mind. "He is getting worse," Fenwick said. Sable's hands stilled in the dirt. 3 episodes this week. The last one took 2 hours to subside. He dislocated his own shoulder trying to contain the shift. Fenwick's voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "I have served him for 15 years. I have never seen him this bad." "He will not let me near him," Sable said. "I know." "Then why are you telling me this?" Fenwick looked at her, and in his weathered face she saw the same desperate, stubborn loyalty she felt in her own chest. "Because someone has to," he said. That night, Sable dreamed of gold eyes and the sound of a wolf screaming. She woke shaking, drenched in sweat, with the keening in her chest so loud she could barely breathe. She made it to the corridor before her legs gave out. She did not remember falling. She remembered the cold stone of the corridor floor against her cheek. She remembered voices, distant and echoing, and hands lifting her, and then nothing. She woke in the infirmary. Gray light. The smell of dried herbs and linen, familiar and grounding. A palace healer was leaning over her, pressing fingers to her wrist, counting silently. Then she saw him. Thane stood by the door. Not sitting, not leaning. Standing at rigid attention with his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His face was ashen. The hollows under his eyes were so deep they looked like bruises, and his left arm was held close to his body in a way that told her the shoulder was still not right. But it was his expression that stopped her breath. Raw, devastated. Every wall he had built in the past week demolished by whatever he had felt when someone came running to tell him she had collapsed in a corridor. "How long has she been unconscious?" he asked the healer. His voice was controlled, but the control was a brittle thing, stretched over something vast and trembling. "Several hours, Your Majesty. Her vitals are stable, but her wolf is in distress. Severe distress. I have seen this before." Seen what before? The healer hesitated, glancing between them. An incomplete bond. When two wolves have begun the bonding process but the bond is not acknowledged or fulfilled, the separation creates a physiological crisis. The wolves cannot regulate without each other. The longer it goes unresolved, the worse the symptoms become. For both parties. Sable watched Thane's face as the words sank in. She saw the flicker of recognition, the flash of guilt, and beneath both, a longing so fierce it seemed to vibrate off him in waves. "You knew," Sable said quietly. He flinched. "You knew this was happening to both of us, and you pushed me away anyway." "I was trying to protect you." The words came out hoarse. "From what?" "From you?" Sable pushed herself upright. The room swayed. The healer reached for her, but she held up a hand. "Your wolf has never hurt me. Every single time I have touched you, it has calmed. I am not the one in danger here, Thane. You are. You are destroying yourself, and you are taking me with you. And if I am wrong?" His voice fractured. "If the wolf takes me and you are standing there, and it does not stop this time? If I do to you what I did to Merrick?" The name hit the air and everything went still. The healer looked away. Fenwick, who had appeared in the doorway, closed his eyes. "Tell me," Sable said. "Tell me what happened to Merrick." Thane did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Merrick was my beta, my closest friend since childhood. He was the only person who never flinched around me, even after the wolf grew stronger than any alphas had the right to be." He swallowed hard. "The coup came from my own council. 4 of them, conspiring with the border packs. They struck at night. Merrick was the first one at my side. He fought to reach me. He was standing right next to me when my wolf erupted." Sable's eyes burned. The wolf could not tell the difference. Thane's voice was flat now, emptied of everything. Friend or enemy, threat or protector, it did not matter. The wolf could not distinguish. And when the chaos ended, Merrick was on the floor, and I was standing over him, and he was gone. The silence that followed was the heaviest Sable had ever known. "That is why you left," she said. "That is why I can never trust the wolf again. That is why you cannot be near me." Sable pushed herself off the cot. The healer made a sound of protest. She ignored it. She stood on unsteady legs and crossed the room to where Thane stood rigid by the door. He watched her approach with the expression of a man bracing for an impact he could not avoid. "Your wolf did not take Merrick from you," Sable said. "The coup took Merrick. The traitors who attacked in the dark took Merrick. You were betrayed and ambushed, and your wolf did what wolves do when their person is about to be taken from this world. It does not change the outcome. No. But it changes the blame." She stopped in front of him. "You have spent 3 years punishing yourself for surviving. You ran away and locked yourself in a cottage and let your kingdom fall apart because you decided you deserved to suffer. But Merrick did not fight to reach you so that you could spend the rest of your life destroying yourself in his name. Thane's breath shuddered out of him. "Let me in," Sable said. "Let me help. I am your wife, and your wolf knows me, and I am not afraid. You should be. You keep saying that, and I keep not leaving. When are you going to accept that I am staying?" He stared at her. His eyes were glassy, his chest heaving. She could feel the bond between them, incomplete and aching, pulling like a current beneath her skin. "I cannot lose someone else," he said, and his voice gave way on the last word. Sable reached up and cupped his face in her hands. He shuddered at the contact, his eyes closing, his hands coming up to cover hers. "Then stop pushing me away," she whispered, "and you will not have to." He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was desperate, consuming. The kiss of a man who had been drowning for 3 years and had finally broken the surface. His hand slid into her hair, and he pulled her against him and kissed her as though she was the air he had been denied. Sable kissed him back with equal ferocity, pouring every ounce of the ache and the longing and the stubborn, furious tenderness she felt into the press of her mouth against his. When the mating bite came, it was instinct. His teeth grazed her neck, and she tilted her head, and the sharp, bright sting of his bite was followed immediately by a flood of warmth so intense she gasped. The bond snapped into place, golden and vast and thrumming with a connection so deep it felt as though it had always been there, waiting. She bit him back, felt the bond surge and seal between them, two halves of something whole finally finding each other. They held each other in the infirmary, forehead to forehead, breathing hard, while the healer discreetly excused herself and Fenwick closed the door from the outside with the quietest, most satisfied click Sable had ever heard. They went to his chambers that night, together, through the front door, in full view of the guards and the servants and anyone else who cared to watch. Sable did not care. Let them whisper. Let the whole court choke on it. The oak door between their rooms stood open for the first time. Thane looked at it, then at her, and something in his expression softened in a way she had never seen before. They slept in the same bed, his arms around her, her back against his chest. Through the bond, she could feel his heartbeat as clearly as her own. Two rhythms finding each other, synchronizing, settling into a shared cadence that felt like the most natural thing in the world. He fell asleep first, deep and immediate, with the surrender of a man whose body had been waiting years for permission to rest. Sable lay in the warmth of him and listened to his breathing and felt joy swell in her chest until it hurt. Then the bond surged. It hit her like a wave, pulling her under, and suddenly she was not in the bed anymore. She was standing in darkness, not fog, not shadow, true darkness, thick and absolute, the kind that presses against your open eyes and offers nothing. But she could feel him. Through the bond, she followed his presence like a thread until she found him. Not the man, the wolf. It stood before her in the darkness, massive and black-furred and trembling. Its gold eyes burned, but there was no rage in them. Only grief, only exhaustion, only the terrible, endless weight of a creature that had been locked inside for 3 years, punished for doing the only thing it knew how to do: protect. "I see you," Sable said. The wolf flinched. Behind it, the darkness shifted and she saw what it saw. The throne room, the fallen. Merrick's face in the final moment, not afraid, not angry, but surprised. The wolf standing over him, howling into the emptiness of the aftermath, unable to understand what it had done, unable to understand why the man it loved was not getting up. The vision replayed, and replayed, an endless loop of the worst moment of its existence, the moment it had tried to save everything and instead destroyed the one thing that mattered most. Sable's tears fell into the darkness. "It was not your fault," she said to the wolf. "You were protecting him. You were doing exactly what you were made to do, and the people who betrayed him used that against you." The wolf's ears flattened. Its massive body trembled harder. Merrick was running toward Thane, not away. He was fighting to reach him. In the chaos, in the dark, you could not tell the difference. No wolf could have. She stepped closer. The wolf did not retreat. "You have been trapped in this moment for 3 years, reliving it, drowning in it." But Merrick would not want this. He loved Thane, and that means he loved you. He would not want you caged. She reached out her hand. The wolf stared at her with its burning gold eyes. Then, slowly, it lowered its great head and pressed its muzzle into her palm. A sound rose from its chest. Not a growl, not a howl, a whimper. Low and broken and full of a sorrow so profound it seemed to vibrate in her very bones. "You are not a monster," Sable whispered. "You are his heart, and I need you to come home." The darkness shattered like glass. Sable woke gasping, her hand pressed against Thane's chest. Beneath her palm, his heartbeat was steady and slow. His eyes were open, looking at her, and they were neither dark nor gold. They were both. Human and wolf, together, integrated. The division between them healed for the first time in 3 years. "What did you do?" he breathed. "I talked to your wolf," Sable said, tears streaming down her face. And he listened. Thane pulled her against his chest so hard it hurt. She felt him shaking, felt the tears on his face where they fell into her hair, felt the bond between them blazing with a warmth so vast it felt like the sun itself had settled behind her ribs. "Thank you," he said into her hair. "Thank you." They held each other until the shaking stopped, and the tears dried and the first pale light of morning crept through the curtains. The wolf did not vanish overnight. Healing never works that way. There were still difficult nights, moments when the memories surfaced and Thane went rigid and silent, and Sable felt the old grief pulse through the bond like a bruise being pressed. She held him through those nights. She did not try to fix it. She just stayed. He shifted for the first time on a clear morning in autumn, 3 months after the bond was sealed. Sable stood in the courtyard and watched the transformation, her heart in her throat. And when the great black wolf stood before her, its gold eyes bright and clear and knowing, it walked to her and pressed its head against her hip and breathed in her scent as though it was the only thing worth breathing. Fenwick, standing nearby, turned away and wiped his face with the back of his hand. He would deny this later. The court adjusted, as courts do. There were whispers about the Hargrove spare who had married the king in a roadside temple. There were raised eyebrows and barely concealed sneers from noble families who had hoped to place their own daughters on the throne. But Sable had survived a lifetime of being invisible in her own family, and the disapproval of strangers was a remarkably small thing compared to that. Her mother sent a letter. 3 pages of outrage and wounded dignity, and not a single question about whether Sable was happy. Sable read it once, folded it neatly, and used it to light the fire in the library. Thane found her there that evening, watching the flames eat the last corner of Lady Hargrove's perfect penmanship. "Important correspondence?" he asked, settling into the window seat beside her. "Not anymore." He looked at her with that expression she had come to know so well, the one that was quiet on the surface but full of warmth underneath, a steady glow that would burn for as long as she let it. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, with a single stone the color of deep green forest. Not a royal ring, not a political statement, just a ring, chosen with the same quiet attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. "We never did this properly," he said. Sable looked at the ring, then at him. "We did it perfectly," she said. "Wildflowers in a jar and a priestess who could not hear the vows, and a man with firewood on his shoulder who said yes to a stranger because she needed a door." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit exactly. That night, Sable fell asleep in the king's arms, in the king's bed, in the king's chambers, and none of those words mattered as much as the simpler ones. She fell asleep beside Thane, who slept deeply and peacefully through the night, his wolf settled and whole inside him, his arm around the woman who had knocked on every locked door until he finally let her in. Outside, the first snow of winter fell softly over Ashenmore Keep. Inside, the fire burned low, and the king and his queen slept.